Detective recapped here. Today, I'm going to explain a sensual thriller film called The Handmaiden. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. The imposing footsteps of marching soldiers echo through the little Korean village. Small children playfully follow the platoon of soldiers marching in the mud. The soldiers scare the children away, and they run, screaming in the rain. In that same Korean village, a woman named Suki is chosen to be a handmaiden for the wealthy Lady Hideko. Suki bid her family goodbye and proceeds to leave for the Hideko's residence. After many hours, Suki finally arrives at the estate late at night. An elderly woman named Miss Sasaki greets her, and she primes Suki on her duties and how she'll be serving the lady of the house, Lady Hideko. Her bed space is directly adjacent to Lady Hideko's quarters because, as Miss Sasaki explains, Lady Hideko can become quite frantic at night. Just as Miss Sasaki had warned, Lady Hideko lets out a hysteric outburst, screaming through the night. The loud screech wakes Suki, prompting her to quickly attend to Lady Hideko. The lady is confused at first, but Suki explains that she's the new maid. To explain her terrors, Lady Hideko tells her that a long time ago, her aunt hung herself on the cherry tree outside of that very room. With Lady Hideko pointing towards the tree, Suki goes to the window to look at it. Her focus breaks, however, when Lady Hideko lets out another blood-curdling scream. Eventually, Suki manages to calm her down by lying beside her and singing her a lullaby. At this point, Suki recalls the events that transpired before that evening. She and her gang of con artists were approached by Count Fujiwara, who is a Korean con man posing as a Japanese count. Fujiwara was scheming to steal Lady Hideko's inheritance by marrying her, then admitting her to an insane asylum afterwards. For this, he hired Suki to be his accomplice. She was to take the role of Lady Hideko's personal maid so she can gently persuade her to marry and elope with him. Then, Fujiwara will give Suki her share of the money once the scheme is accomplished. But Fujiwara wasn't the only man who had his eyes set on the lady. He explained that Hideko lives with her uncle Kozuki, a Korean man who helped the Japanese take over Korea in exchange for a gold mine. Now, Kozuki mainly used his wealth to feed into his unhealthy obsession with rare books. Because of this, he intends on marrying his own niece-in-law, so he can continue to fund his fixation with rare books. He added that Hideko reads her uncle's books aloud for his guests during his book readings, which gives her headaches. To this, he tasked Suki with helping Hideko prepare for those readings. Back at the estate, Suki gazes upon her mistress's face properly for the first time. Suki is completely taken aback by her beauty, which she couldn't fully appreciate the night before since it was too dark to see. Then, Lady Hideko asks Suki to read the recommendation letter that she brought with her. Though Suki attempts to comply, she eventually gives up and admits that she doesn't know how to read. Lady Hideko doesn't mind her illiteracy, and she even says that she doesn't mind if she curses or steals. Instead, she firmly tells Suki never to lie to her. When Suki agrees, Lady Hideko shows Suki a picture of her mother, and the two begin to get even more acquainted. Then, Lady Hideko leaves for reading practice, instructing Suki to pick her up by noon. With her mistress gone, Suki takes liberties to cycle through Lady Hideko's belongings, marveling at the luxury and the grandiosity of the items. When it's time to pick up her mistress, Suki is startled to see Lady Hideko sitting on the floor across a black-clad man with white hair. Suddenly, the man warningly shouts the word snake to Suki, and Suki screams in horror when a snake statue appears in front of her by the doorstep. Lady Hideko quickly pulls a lever, causing a steel gate to emerge from the doorstep and keeping Suki from coming inside. With Count Fujiwara set to arrive in the afternoon, Suki gives Lady Hideko a bath. Hideko sits in a tub while sucking on a piece of hard candy that Suki gave to her. Suki lovingly bathes her, and she even calls Hideko her baby. Hideko then complains that her tooth is sharp and that it's hurting her. Suki leaves the room and returns shortly after with an object in her hand. She puts her thumb inside Hideko's mouth and chisels the sharp tooth. The moment is sensual, intimate, and Suki starts feeling nervous while her admiring gaze travels over Lady Hideko's figure. In turn, Lady Hideko softly touches Suki's elbow while her thumb remains in her mouth. But their heated moment comes to an end as Suki breaks from the spell, and she continues with Lady Hideko's bath to prepare her for her meeting with the Count. When Count Fujiwara arrives, he goes to greet Lady Hideko and Suki. After their first encounter, they retreat to their respective rooms for a brief respite for the upcoming dinner. At this time, Count Fujiwara summons Suki into his room, where the two of them briefly meet for their ongoing operation. Afterwards, Suki returns to her mistress while bearing Count Fujiwara's gift, earrings made of blue spinel. Suki dresses Lady Hideko in a white dress along with the earrings that Fujiwara gave her. With Suki following Lady Hideko to the dining hall, she stands in awe while marveling at the lady's beauty. That evening, Hideko decides to play around and dress Suki in one of her gowns. Hideko comments that when she's all dressed up, Suki looks just like a lady herself. They share a laugh, but when their playful laughter had died down, the two women undress each other slowly, both of them heavy with desire. The following day, Suki accompanies Hideko while waiting for the Count and their 2 p.m. art class. That morning, though, the Count was also making fake books in the library for the unknowing Kozuki. While Hideko's frantically and excitedly waiting for Fujiwara to visit her, Suki starts feeling sorry that Hideko's putting her hopes up on a scoundrel like him. Finally, 2 p.m. comes, but the Count's yet to make his appearance. This leaves Hideko scuffling through the room, repeatedly checking and arranging things for the Count's visit. When Suki checks outside the room, she sees the Count taking his time with a cup of tea while he's making Hideko wait. Suki angrily motions him inside the room, so they can finally begin their art class. It ends up being slow and awkward. The Count keeps going on with his pedantic ramblings while Hideko paints. These phony remarks are all too apparent to Suki, and they even made her scoff. Then, the Count abruptly ends the session early, much to Hideko's disappointment. One day, Suki accompanies Lady Hideko for a stroll through the woodsy area of the estate. When Lady Hideko asks about Suki's mother, she reveals that, much like Hideko's aunt, her mother was hanged, except she didn't do it to herself. Then, Lady Hideko tells Suki that her mother died giving birth to her, and it's always made her feel guilty since it felt like she strangled her mother herself. Placing her hands on Hideko's face, Suki assures her that no baby is ever guilty for being born, her mother was lucky to have her before she died, and she had no regrets. But what Suki is telling Hideko was her mother's very own words to her, and she told Suki that before she was hanged for several crimes. Afterwards, Suki briefly leaves Hideko's side to pick up some mushrooms. As Suki leaves, the Count appears and joins Lady Hideko. Sometime later, Suki returns from mushroom hunting, only to be surprised when she discovers that Lady Hideko's already inside the house with the Count. From outside the window, Suki spots the Count flirting with and touching Lady Hideko. The sight sends Suki in a jealous rage, and she throws the tray of wild mushrooms on the ground before storming towards her room. The following day, Suki follows the couple for a day of landscape painting. They walk side by side while Suki follows closely behind them while carrying their painting equipment. Looking back at Suki, Fujiwara orders her to retrieve the oil paint they had left in the house. She rushes back to the house, but when she returns to them, she is startled to see Fujiwara and Hideko kissing passionately while Hideko sat on Fujiwara's lap. Stunned, Suki could only stare at Lady Hideko's eyes, her gaze filled with betrayal. Hideko stares back at Suki with a look of guilt written on her face. That night, Suki lays as she tries to convince herself to let go of her feelings for Lady Hideko. Instead, she attempts to focus on the money she'll receive once they've accomplished their goal. Suddenly, Hideko's bell rings violently, getting louder and louder each time she pulls on the string. Suki is slow to respond, still rattled by her own vicious jealousy and unshakable feelings of love. Eventually, Suki enters the room. Hideko ushers her to her bed, ordering her to sleep there that night. Hideko admits that the Count had proposed to her, but she was having doubts. The Count scares her. He gives her the same feeling of alarm, like how someone would jerk their hand away from a hot stove on reflex. Finally, Hideko confesses that she's as innocent as a child, and she even starts asking what men want. Understanding what she's getting at, Suki pulls out a piece of hard candy and sucks on it, coating her lips and her mouth with the flavor. Suki moves her lips directly against Lady Hideko's lips and motions it side to side. Though she's flustered, Lady Hideko still licks Suki's lips slowly and with much indulgence. Dazed by the candy's flavors in Suki's mouth, Hideko lovingly sucks more of it from her lips and tongue. Still pretending to teach her about making love, Suki repeatedly demonstrates to Hideko how the Count would do it with her. She kisses Hideko and touches her where she wants to be touched. Soon enough, the two women finally give in, and they make love passionately in the night. The following day, Fujiwara holds another art session with Lady Hideko. Suki sits meekly in one corner while Fujiwara fondles Hideko. Uncomfortable with the Count's advances, Lady Hideko wrestles against him. He then hands Suki a coin, sending her away so that he can be alone with Hideko. Suki makes her stand and refuses to leave the room, which angers the Count. Suki and Fujiwara meet outside of the house, where he scolds her for her actions. After some back and forth, they both calm down, and Suki reminds the Count not to push Lady Hideko too hard. Later that evening, Lady Hideko asks Suki whether she should go through the marriage or not. Suki feigns excitement and encourages Lady Hideko, but this only leads to Lady Hideko feeling betrayed by her false feelings. She ends up slapping Suki repeatedly and pushing her away. In the end, Lady Hideko goes along with the marriage, provided that Suki comes with them to Japan. The end of the Count's scheme is nearing, and the three of them escape to Japan. The Count and the lady are wed, and for the following week, they reside in a traditional Japanese home. Day and night, the women are left in the house, while the Count spends much of his time arranging the papers and certificates to receive Hideko's inheritance. Finally, after a week, the Count arrives at the house with a bag of cash for Suki. The final phase of the plan is now about to commence. Two men come in from the local asylum, and they start to interview Suki about Lady Hideko. One day, the three of them drive to the local asylum. Suki, expecting Hideko to be taken in, is surprised when the nurses begin to restrain her instead. In a sly act of betrayal, the Count and Hideko accuse Suki of being the Mad Countess, framing her as delusional and believing herself to be a handmaid. As Suki is taken to the asylum in Hideko's place, she realizes that Hideko wasn't so innocent after all. Many years ago, Hideko lived in their estate with her uncle Kozuki and her aunt. Hideko was subjected to several years of physical and psychological abuse by her uncle, and the book readings she had were actually for obscene and perverse literature. Kozuki had groomed her to read these books aloud in a sensual manner even from an early age. One evening, a young Hideko was being frightened by Miss Sasaki, but her aunt intervened as she was the only one who was kind to Hideko. During one of their reading practices, Kozuki told Hideko that she had insanity in her blood, and he goes on to describe in detail the many unethical practices of the asylums at the time. Those horrid descriptions distressed Hideko's aunt. She got up from the table and fled to the exit, but Miss Sasaki pulled the lever to shut the gate. One evening, Hideko stumbled inside the room where her aunt read her uncle's lewd novels aloud. Several men in black suits sat there listening to the obscene stories, and Hideko's aunt was in the middle of the stage, doing her best to smile for Hideko, but she was breaking apart on the inside. The following morning, Hideko's aunt hung herself from the cherry tree. Years later, Hideko took the role of the explicit novel reader. Much like her aunt before her, she sat in a traditional Japanese outfit in front of her uncle's guests, even going so far as to demonstrate one of the lewd positions depicted in the novel using a wooden puppet. It was a perverse and even cruel scene to take part in, and Hideko participated in it against her will. In one of the readings, Count Fujiwara appeared in the audience, meeting Hideko and her uncle for the first time. After convincing Kozuki to grant a dinner with him and his niece, Count Fujiwara set up a secret meeting with Hideko. During the night, Fujiwara admitted his scheme to him. He knew that she was not the type of woman that could be seduced, so instead of seduction, he decided to strike a deal with her. She was to split her inheritance with Fujiwara, and in exchange, she'll be taken away from her abusive uncle. Still, Hideko wasn't entirely convinced. She was worried that her uncle would find them and take them to the basement. When Fujiwara asked about the basement, she explained that when people are hanged, their tongues stick out, and their feces are expelled. But when they found her in, her mouth was shut, and her bottom was clean. It turns out that her uncle had taken her to the basement to torture her after she tried running away, and the sick man told Hideko in detail what he did. So for his wedding gift, Fujiwara offered her a vial of poison so that if ever Hideko's uncle found her, she wouldn't have to be subjected to cruel torture. For Hideko's final suggestion, she proposed to take a gullible maid to send to the madhouse in her name in order to throw off her uncle. Soon, it is revealed that while Suki thought she was tricking Hideko, the lady had her own scheme in place. She took advantage of Suki's illiteracy to exchange letters with Fujiwara, and she made sure to put up an elaborate act so that Suki would remain unsuspicious. Finally, during the night that they had made love, Lady Hideko changed her mind about her plans, and she realized that she truly loved Suki. In a whirlwind of torrid emotions, Lady Hideko pulled out a rope and tried to hang herself at the cherry tree. However, Suki was able to stop her at the last minute. It was at this time that Lady Hideko told Suki the whole truth and that she was being tricked by Fujiwara as well. To fight for their happiness, the two lovers hatched a plan of their own. Suki wrote a letter to her crew of thieves and conmen to help them with the plan. Before they departed for Japan, Suki discovered the perverse materials that Hideko was forced to read. Suki destroyed all of the books in a fit of rage, ripping, slashing, and ruining each one before finally drenching them in water. After leaving Suki in the asylum, Count Fujiwara and Lady Hideko convene at a nearby restaurant. Hideko asks Fujiwara if he pities Suki, but he says he doesn't. Meanwhile, at the asylum, a fire breaks out, causing a panic in the cafeteria. Suddenly, Suki's crew emerges while disguised as firemen. They maneuver to assist Suki in her escape. Later at the hotel, Hideko places the poison the Count gave her in a glass of wine. She then visits the Count in his hotel room under the pretense of making love to him. There, she successfully gets the Count to drink the wine. He passes out before he could have his way with her. True to their arrangement, Hideko goes to meet up with Suki. Meanwhile, they had some thugs take Count Fujiwara directly to Hideko's uncle, together with a letter explaining the true identity of the false count. Because of his deception, Kozuki subjects Fujiwara to gruesome torture. During this time, Fujiwara requests to smoke his own blue cigarette before his death. As the count lights his second blue cigarette, he reveals to Kozuki that the cigarettes are laced heavily with mercury. So before Kozuki manages to dismember Fujiwara completely, Fujiwara gets to kill Kozuki and himself as a last-ditch effort to stave off any more torture. In the end, Suki and Hideko escape to Shanghai, China, where the two of them finally live in peace. Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.